Hello there, and welcome to your session with Andrea Possee, who will be talking to you today about music composition for video games and movies. Please use the chat function to ask your questions, and we'll aim to answer them as many as you can. We want you to bring as many questions as you can to the field, so even start as soon as you can, and we'll try and read them out for you. We hope you enjoyed today's session, and we have a massive thank you to Andrea for taking her time to join us today on our 15th Confetti Industry Week. Do not forget, there's still plenty more sessions to go for, so please book upcoming sessions on the iw.confetti.ac.uk. Make sure you're using your Confetti or NTU email address to do so. As part of Industry Week, we're running a competition that you can win some really cool prizes. So as you can do so, please tag us on Twitter and Instagram with hashtag IW21, sharing your experiences throughout the whole week. And now, let's not waste any more time. I'll hand you over to Andrea. So thank you very much. Hello there, Andrea. How are you?
I'm very well. Thanks for having me.
It's going to be a bit of a it's a pleasure. So just so as an introduction, do you like to introduce yourself and tell what your role is?
Yep, I'm Andrea. I wear many hats actually. I'm a composer. I'm an orchestrator. I also do the odd bit of conducting if need be through the orchestration. So yeah, that's what I do. So no day is the same, which is good, and it keeps it very varied.
Yep. So basically every kind of project's a bit different for you, isn't it?
Yeah. I could be working on a game, and then the next week I could be orchestrating for a full orchestra that's going off to get recorded, and then the next week I could be doing a little short film, or I could be doing a feature film. It just depends. Wow,
that's fantastic. It means, like I said, it must be keeping you on your toes then.
It does, and it keeps it interesting because they all have kind of different energies about it. Orchestration's got a very different energy to composing, and if you've just come off a big project, it's quite nice to still be working and because you can get a little bit burnt out. So it's quite nice to do something different, and just get a different energy about your work.
I can imagine. So let's start right from the very beginning. So I want to start. How did you get started? How did you start? How did you get into this field, basically?
Okay, well, I studied music at university a long time ago, and I was told at the time my music was very filmic, but I didn't know how to go about it. So I kind of travelled around the world doing different little bits and bobs, jobs. And then when I came back to this country, I did a master's. I decided that's really what I wanted to do. And by then there was more courses available. So I took a master's with ThinkSpace in orchestration. And I started from there, really. I went to a lot of film festivals. And I went to meet people at these film festivals, and it takes quite a while to build up. I kind of think of it like a tree. Like I'm a tree, and all these people that I work with are all the branches, and you need lots and lots of branches to be working all the time. And then you never know what's going to come off each branch, because that branch can lead to meeting somebody else, and the branch goes off in a different direction.
So is it mostly, so basically you got into basically putting your finger in all these different pies through networking, basically?
Yeah. Definitely through networking, especially if well, not at the minute, but especially if you can get it face to face and meet people, they will remember you. Sometimes they don't come back to you. Sometimes it's years, depending on the project, especially if it's animation. But some can come back to you straight away because they have a project, or you can hear from a friend of theirs. In fact, I didn't get this job. I went out for a job with a director, a short film. I didn't get it. However, his friend was a programmer, game programmer, and he was doing a game. So then he hired me to do the game. So although I didn't get that original short film, you know, I was recommended. So you never know where it can lead.
Fantastic. I wanted to go into because looking at your CV, you've gone for quite a bit of education to get to the point. How much has that helped you a lot to get to the point you are now? Yeah.
Well, basically, I went. I had a couple of kids, and I'd been out the industry. You've frozen to me now, so hopefully you can still hear me. I had a couple of kids, so I really needed to get up to grade with technology. So that was my main pull for going back to education, just to get up in all the software and the computer side of things, as well as being allowed to make mistakes as a student. Oh, you can still hear me? We can hear and see all fine. Okay, it's just Johan that's frozen for me. Yeah, so basically as a student, you're allowed to make mistakes. And if you're thinking of going into orchestration where you're working with live orchestras, there's a lot of money riding on you. and there really is no room for mistakes. So that's basically why I went into education. We've lost Johan. Well, let me go into the chat and see if I can answer a question while we wait for him. What's a typical day like for me? From Jamie. Hi, Jamie. It depends on what I'm working in. I think most composers these days, unless you're in like the top 5% who are either working on TV dramas or you live in LA, you tend to have several income streams. So my income streams, I do some composing for films, short films. I also compose for games. I've mostly done mobile games. I orchestrate, I music prep, and I also write quite a lot of library tracks. So I've got a lot of different income streams coming in at the same time. And basically what I said earlier about the tree, all these branches, those directors or projects aren't happening all at once. So this branch of the tree, if they're developing a project, you can maybe work with this branch of the tree. So hopefully you've got a kind of steady workflow coming through the year. Okay. When composing, another one from Jamie. When composing for a film, what is the start of the process for you? Basically, usually it starts with the script, reading the script and just trying to get the focus point from there. Sorry, Johan, I'm just reading the questions because you disappeared.
Oh, believe me, thank you. You've done a wonderful job in trying to catch up. But yeah, continue on.
Oh, so Jamie was just asking me what's the start of the process. So I'll basically try and get a sound world, get going. And that helps for a number of reasons, because we've all got samples. A few of sometimes you've got live players, but you've got this massive world, and how do you suddenly think, oh, what am I going to write for? So I try and get a sound world and say, right, this is what I'm going to write for, and that helps a lot. And then from there I'll maybe start getting some themes going or within that sound world, and then see where it develops from there.
Okay, just elaborate a little bit more on that then. We've actually got a question from Charlie Sharp here. It actually says, are there any composers that inspire you for that? So in other words, when you're thinking of, let's say, picking a sound world, a soundscape, are there any composers or any kind of things that inspire you in that sense?
Other composers, you mean? Well, sometimes, usually you have a temp track on the film. So that's music that's been put on by the editor.
Yeah.
Usually just to help pacing and rhythm and things like that. Sometimes it's totally wrong. Or sometimes they have a budget of like 500 quid and they've put John Williams tracks in there. So there's no way they're ever going to get that, So that can be an inspiration just to get the tempo right, or the feelings. Sometimes the sound is right as well.
Yes.
But sometimes it's totally wrong, and that can be useful. If it's totally wrong, you go, that's wrong, it feels wrong, it sounds wrong. So you can cut out a lot of steps there. Okay,
so that's an interesting one, actually, just to elaborate on that, is like, what's your gut feeling when you sit there going, that's wrong? How would you respond to that? Especially if it's like a director or someone has that in mind. How would you respond to that? How would you tell them, hey, this is wrong, let me throw my idea into the pool?
I would maybe approach it subtly, saying, oh, it feels too slow, or we don't have the budget for that, so let me write this and we can try this. Sometimes it's a bit of a challenge because they have got totally attached to the temp track.
Yeah.
But sometimes you can turn it around and they go, yeah, that's absolutely right, which is great. And then other times they're like, no, we'd really like the temp track, get as close as you can without getting sued.
Which, I have heard of film directors who have gotten so attached to their temp tracks that they end up, the composition almost sounds exactly the same as what has been done, which I'm not sure whether that's just because you want to just satisfy the director or because there's no other way around it.
Well, as a media composer, you're not writing music for yourself. Ultimately, you're writing music for the film. So if the film director comes in and says, I want this, you can maybe say, oh, I've written this, and you can try and pitch it as best you can. But if he goes, no, I want this, you have to go with what he wants, because it's his film.
There you go. Well,
Yeah.
speaking of which, then we'll gladly start going into your actual compositions themselves, because I want to talk about that. You've already been doing quite a bit. You've been doing composing for quite a few projects already. A lot of short films, a lot of feature films, things like that as well. So I want to talk about maybe the process of how you would start of something when it comes to maybe a feature film, for example. I've already got a question here from Michael Farnsworth, who says, like, when you're going into a project, do you already have any certain ideas developed prior to seeing any visuals at all?
If you get the script, then yes, you can. But sometimes, and you can pull, it depends on the script, because obviously if it's a film that's sad and things like that, you're going to have, all right, I'm writing in a minor key. You know, there's certain things you can pull from a script. But sometimes I visualize something and then I see it on camera and go, oh no, that's totally different to what I was expecting. So it can be a double-edged sword sometimes.
So basically, like, yeah, you can play around and get an idea, but it's not as if it's like, don't get too attached. Almost.
Yeah, if they maybe haven't edited the film, it's quite good, because you could write a bunch of ideas and then they can maybe put it to the picture whilst editing. But it can be like, oh, how long is a piece of string kind of thing, because you could write all these themes and then they're like, no, don't like that, no, don't like that. And then when you see the visuals, you go, oh, okay, I get it a bit better now.
Yeah. I get that now. Brilliant. So I want to see what would be, now let's build up a little bit. Let's start off with, would it be all right if we can go right into the first track, if that's all right? So we can go on to the first track, that's okay? Wonderful. So this is the title sequence music for Jolly Girls, yes?
Yeah. So this was an animation, short animation, about 15 minutes long. And it's set up north in a made-up town where they don't like new people coming in. They're very much set in their ways. They've lived in this village all their life. And it's two older sisters who've never left this village.
Yeah.
And they were in a thing called the Jolly Girls, which was basically these tap dancing girls kind of thing. And one by one, these Jolly Girls have gone missing. They've died for some reason, and they're the only two left, and they're proud of this. But this other old woman comes into the village and says, well, I'm a Jolly Girl too. And they're like, no, you're not. We're the only ones left. And it kind of, well, they don't believe her, and they get quite protective about it. So that's what that theme was basically saying. So my brief for that was Bernard Herrmann, which you perhaps can't tell from there, but you will from the next track. So obviously, when the director says, right, we're up north, I want Bernard Herrmann, they're stuck in their ways. So there's horns in there, there's strings in there, because that's Bernard Herrmann. When I thought of the north, I kind of thought of Wallace and Gromit, but I didn't want to be too Wallace and Gromit. So obviously the horns in there, that kind of northern brass band sound. And it's kind of got an old feel about it. It's got, because they were dancing girls, it's got the 3/4. And that's basically the opening titles, where it's setting the scene where there's, you know, it's going on about Brexit and immigrants, and there's all this other stuff kind of coming into it.
Okay, because it's so through that alone, just through your composition alone, you have to try and at least hint on all of this stuff. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So one thing I want to ask, got a question from Tom, from Drum Drake here. Says, he actually goes down and says, like, do you get told sometimes about instrumentation to use, or do you have a bit more free reign?
Well, with this, he said Bernard Herrmann, so immediately it was going to be strings. Yes. But because it was up north and things, I wanted to add other instruments to it to kind of pad it out a little bit.
Okay.
Some directors are like, oh, just do whatever you want. And others I've had before, and anything as long as it's not a piano. I hate piano. And then I have had other directors going, actually, I would like some drums in it. And then they'll go do 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 and sing out a drum pattern. And I'll be like, okay, I think you want to be the composer. You get a whole wide variety.
I was going to say then, because one of the things we can delve into is sort of establishing that relationship between composer and director, and how do you sort of maintain that balance, and how you're going to satisfy the director's needs, but also feel comfortable enough to apply your own ideas?
Yeah, this animation Jolly Girls, this was my third project with the director. So basically, he trusted me after the first one. He basically went, I want Bernard Herrmann, just go and do your thing. You know what you're doing, off you go. So that was great. Whereas when you are working with directors for the first time, you do have to win over their trust. They have to trust you because this is their baby, and they can't control the music. They can pretty much control cameras and acting and things because they're directing it, but they can't write the score because that's not what they do. So it's a really big thing for them to hand over their film to you, because you can totally change their film. If you get it right, it's great, it can go up another level. But if you get it wrong, it can totally sound and bring it down.
Is it almost as if it's like the director has to almost give control away temporarily to someone else, basically?
And for some, that's really exciting. And for others, it's they're not happy about that, really.
Absolutely.
And that's hence why they maybe temp the tracks, you know, give you so much temp music and all that kind of thing.
And I'm assuming that's the reason why they're kind of like, some people are nervous about that, isn't it?
Yeah, and a lot of directors are not musical, which is actually, I find it easier if they're not musical, because you can just talk to them about emotions and what they're trying to portray in the film. And that's much easier than a director who is musical saying, oh, I want a trumpet and I want the strings to do pizzicato here. Because a lot of the time, actually, they're not correct. And they'll say, oh, the trumpet's not playing right. And you're like, yeah, that's a clarinet, but we'll just let that slide.
Wrong instrument, buddy.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's easier if they're not. And you can just describe, it's like, right, I want a sad kind of feeling here, and, you know, talk adjectives and emotions and things like that.
It gives you a bit more freedom.
Yeah, because if you're told, oh, it's sad and we're up north and it's a bit desolate, musically, you're thinking things then.
Yeah.
But you don't need to say that to the director. You're going, yeah, I know what you mean. And then you can produce it. And then they go, yep, that's right.
Okay. I think it'd be a good time now to sort of play the next track from this film, which is the Nightmare sequence, I believe it is. So would you like to play that, please? Right, so we're getting a very different tone here. Do you want to talk about how this is very different to the theme music? So how did that go?
Yes, so the story throughout the animation is based on The Old Woman Who Swallowed a Fly. So each different scene, so that you could hear that theme coming through there. And this is at the end of the film where this old lady has come in, and we don't know if the two sisters are dreaming or if this old lady's trying to poison them and get rid of them. Has she killed off all the other jolly girls? So basically it's the house, it's nighttime, we're creeping up the stairs and we go past the bathroom and we see the shower, hence that psycho kind of motif that you heard. And then it's basically, it's just a mush. We don't know if it's reality, we don't know if they're going to be murdered or if they're just dreaming. Because you see at the end, this old lady with a horse's head, kind of like from The Godfather.
Oh, dear.
So that old lady who swallowed a fly, little themes in there. The theme from the opening's in there, and each of the 4 string instruments are playing a different theme, and it's just all one on top of the other as it's all this stuff's happening in the animation.
Because, like I said, because it still feels like it's from the same movie, but it's now a different genre.
Yes.
Because you've got all the instrumentation, but it's a different genre approach. We've got a question actually from Tyler Buxton. It says, are there any particular genres that you actually prefer to compose and orchestrate for?
Musical genres?
Yes.
I'm not into thrash metal, so no, I wouldn't want to be doing that. I really do like writing for real instruments, because I think it just gives an elevation to the film. There's a human element to it. I really enjoy that. I do love writing for strings and brass. I like writing for woodwind as well, but nowadays you really need to be having hybrid scores. So I use a lot of samples alongside it as well, and they are looking for that contemporary sound that you really can only get from samples. You know, strings and brass, you know, these sound as they sound. So for a contemporary sound, it's all the kind of percussive and the whooshies and all that kind of stuff. It's
just a build up. That's more for texture now, I believe, isn't it? Just texture. Let's apply the same question again to film genres this time. Is there any particular film genres you prefer?
I love animation.
Yeah.
I absolutely love animation. The Stardom and Turbocat that we're coming to, that 2 years ago, that was one of my dreams. I got to orchestrate and conduct. So that was a feature-length animation. And that was such fun, because you never know what the music just changes all the time in animation, which is great. So I love animation. I like quirky. I like dark, but with a good sense of humor. Like if I could have done the Addams Family, I mean, I would never have done as good a job as Mark Shaman, obviously, because that was just a perfect score. There's 2 scores for that. But quirky, fun, and a little bit dark.
In fact, that's the thing, is we actually had another question from Hannah Mitchell, who said, which film would you wish to compose? It sounds like the Addams Family.
It would have been the Addams Family, but I wouldn't have done nearly as good a job as Mark Shaman.
Oh, that's wonderful. So yeah, it seems like already it's kind of nice, actually, you talking a bit about how you get your ideas, your process about getting your sort of film stuff. But now I want to move into slightly to a different aspect now, because you do orchestration and conducting now.
Yeah.
So before we go and talk about play some music, do you want to describe basically what's the difference between that? Like, what's the difference between composing and orchestration?
Okay, so as an orchestrator, the composer writes the music, and then as an orchestrator, I would get a MIDI file, which is all the violins, any instrument in the orchestra. I would get a MIDI file, and I would have to clean it up, get rid of any CC information, make sure it's quantized and in the right place. And then I turn that MIDI information into a score that the conductor can read, and then create parts for the players to play. But when I get the MIDI score, because some composers don't read music, but they will write for maybe like a string section or something like that. And as we know, I mean, there's so many different types of libraries for example, strings. So I might have 12 different patches playing one string line.
Okay.
So obviously you can't have that. So you have to turn those 12 patches into one line of music.
Okay.
You know, which can be a bit of a challenge. Or, you know, if you've got a brass section and you've maybe got 3 horns going there, but the composer's written a huge patch in Spitfire and is like 12 horns playing this, it's like, well, we don't have 12 horns. So another way of being an orchestrator is going, okay, I need to now arrange it so it sounds as big, but I only have 3 players. How am I going to do that?
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So is you just thinking, it's thinking more about the harmonies, how you're going to stack them up, how you're going to make it feel as big with your limitations?
Yeah. And basically it's just making what they've written playable. Sometimes it is, and it kind of comes out the box and it's great, but for the composers who perhaps don't read music or anything, and it's a new genre for them, they might have like woodwind players playing 2 notes at a time. Well, they can't do that, they can only play 1, just things like that. And that's where the orchestrator comes in really useful.
Okay, wonderful. Just it's not a question here, but it's now my curiosity as actually. Have you ever had a moment when you're doing orchestration? Are there moments when you're looking at the composition and not happy with it? And I mean, how do you feel about that when you're trying to orchestrate a piece of music that you yourself are not very happy with?
I can maybe not be happy with the placement, so I could maybe say, oh, that needs to be an octave lower, or we need to switch that round about. But it's not really my job to say, no, that composition I'm not very happy with, because it's been signed off by the director.
Yeah, so at that point it's like saying you have to just make the best of what you got.
Yeah. Yeah.
So something else I want to ask then, speaking of which, because you've talked about this as well, we've got a question here is saying, basically, it's how long did it actually take you to learn to sort of learn sheet music, and how is it important when you're composing to actually know how to write for sheet music?
As a composer, no, it's not, because if you get a budget for an orchestra, then you would hire an orchestrator and they would do that for you. However, if you want to get the best out of samples and you are writing for example, strings and brass, it does help, because if you play the chords in on a piano, I mean, it's going to be under your fingers. But if you're writing for a string quintet, like for the 5 strings, you know, the double bass is going to be down here, the cello's here, viola's there, violin 2's there, and you can't play that on a piano. So if you could know to program it in, and you know where sounds good for an instrument, what sounds good for an instrument, that will improve your composition.
Okay. I've got a few questions here, sort of semi-related to that, if that's okay with you. So, Katie's actually said, what kind of software do you actually use for creating, editing, and orchestrating music?
For the orchestration side, I used to use Sibelius, but I orchestrated a documentary last week and I jumped over to Dorical for the first time. And I think I'll be sticking with Dorical. It's very intuitive. So actually there was a song in the documentary, a big kind of Bond song, and I had to use Sibelius for that, and I had to use Dorical for the score. So it was a bit like being bilingual, actually. But there's a lot of people going over to Dorical, but the standard at the minute is Sibelius. Unless you're working with Americans, they use Finale, which is not as nice a program. It's a bit okay. Yeah. So you kind of need to have all 2 or 3 softwares on the go. It's a bit like if you're a composer, you might work in Cubase, but then you might have to do something in Pro Tools, you know, so you have your main one. So
basically it's better to know more than one piece of software.
It's good to have it in your back pocket just in case.
Okay, wonderful.
Yeah.
I think this would be a good time to actually maybe go through and have a listen to one of your orchestrations. Now, this is for Stardog and TurboCat. Do you want to explain what the project is before we have a listen?
Sure. At the delight of this coming out at the same time as Frozen 2, so you can imagine how that went.
Oh dear.
So no, it did really well. Stardog and TurboCat, it was a feature-length animation, and it was about a dog who didn't realise he had superpowers. And TurboCat thinks he's Batman, really. And they're in a world where humans hate animals because the mayor of the town's daughter got scratched as a little girl. So he's like, right, pets are out. So that's kind of the world they're set in. And the first track is about this policeman getting rid of his dog. The dog thinks he's going, ooh, I'm going up in a rocket into space. It's really, really exciting. I'm on a mission kind of thing. But really, the owner's getting rid of the dog, and he lands in a town 50 years later where there's no pets.
All right. Well, that's a great way to start off. Shall we play the theme from that one, please? Thank you. Okay, we're at the build-up of this, isn't it? So do you want to maybe discuss a little bit about how your choices in orchestrating this piece?
Well, actually, the composer was pretty good, and she's a string player, actually, so the strings were pretty much set, but she didn't really have an idea about brass.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is him heroically going off in the rocket. So my main job was here. She'd written for trumpet, which is really, really high. And in sample land, you can do that, but in real life, you couldn't. So I ended up saying, right, we need a soprano trumpet in there, which is quite unusual. And just having to arrange I had 3 trombones. I had 2 trombones and a bass trombone. I had 3 horns and 3 trumpets, one being a soprano trumpet. And I had full strings.
So that's the thing as well I want to ask is, are there, like, since you're orchestrating, yes, the composer might be writing as a whole, but is it up to you at the end of the day to figure out which instruments work best?
Yes and no. I mean, you are working for the composer, and they say, if I want it on this, I want it on this. You're like, okay. But I did make suggestions, and I would especially shuffle the brass around. She would be writing too high for the trombones. I'm like, yeah, we need to put that on the horns because they've got a brighter tone up there. This is definitely out of the range of the trumpet. We need this soprano trumpet. And Heather Fenity, who wrote the music for that, she was like, yeah, that's good. That's why I hired you. You know, I need your advice, which is really, really nice.
Oh, that's lovely. So it shows at the end of the day is that you are like the guide for the composer at times.
Yes, because you're standing in front of a room, and if you've got 52 musicians in front of you, and they're each getting paid £53, you know, a minute or for an hour, sorry, then that's a lot of money. and you need to know it's right, and you don't want a hand going up going, can I just ask you about this? So yeah, you want somebody that knows what they're talking about, and you can put something on the music stand that they can just play without asking questions.
So they're sort of like, okay, I understand this now. It's simple, it's straightforward, I understand it. It's all good, basically.
Yeah.
I want to throw one thing, though, actually, quickly, is you've also mentioned that part of it, you've actually done some conducting at some point. What's the difference there this time around? Because are you conducting what you've orchestrated, or does someone give you something they've orchestrated and you conduct?
Well, that started on the Turbo Quack was the first time I'd actually conducted. So I kind of got jumped in at the deep end with that. I'd only done, I was lucky enough to go out to Warner Brothers and record with my masters. So I got pulled out at the end and kind of did my thing, and I wasn't very good at it, actually. So I did a couple of workshops. And then when I got the chance to do Orchestrate Stardog, she was looking for somebody that could do everything. So I had to orchestrate, music prep, conduct, and do all the click tracks for Pro Tools. And that was how I got the gig. So I knew the music very well because I'd orchestrated it. So that was easy. But people who do sessions as conductors, sometimes they're sight reading in the session.
Wow. So they actually be on the fly going, okay, we're now on to this.
Yeah, because time is so pushed, especially in post-production. You know, composers are pushed for time. By the time the orchestrator gets it, sometimes it can be like, I need it tomorrow morning, and it's like 8 o'clock at night, and it's like full orchestra, 3-minute cue or whatever. So you're up all night doing it, and then only then when you're walking at the studio at 9 a.m. and you're like, oh, hello, Mr. or Mrs. Conductor, here's the score, off you go. It can be like that.
Wow. And even still, most of them are pulling off an amazing job. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's not like conducting a symphony, though, because you do have a click track in your ear.
Yeah.
So, I mean, for Stardog, I knew the music really well. And if the players were kind of like, oh, I'm not quite getting it, I would explain what was happening in the scene. There was a cue for the violin twos, and they were playing like all these harmonics with no vibrato and things. And they were like, why are we doing this? And I was like, well, Stardog's frozen in space, and he's just kind of floating around. And as soon as they heard that, they were like, right, we've got it now. So as a conductor, you can help kind of guide the players in what mood the composer's trying to get.
When you're, let's say, doing orchestration, and when you're doing like the or conducting to record with an orchestra, do you actually sometimes have visual aids to go with it, or are you sometimes doing this completely blind?
I did Stardog completely blind, but in the bigger studios like at Abbey Road, I was in there for Doctor Strange, which was good. I was helping with the music prep, and they had it obviously in a great big screen, and the conductors, you know, conducting to the picture there.
Okay, well, I assume that must definitely help then.
Yeah, with the bigger budgets, they can do that, but the smaller studios, you can't really have a big screen. The composer's watching it in the studio with the screen, but as a conductor, I was just working off the score.
Not bad. Okay. Just to throw a few questions out there for you. One of them is, do you find, one of our students said, do you find inspiration from classical music as a whole?
Yeah, I listen to classical music, but I do, because that's what my original degree was in.
Yeah.
But I love classical music that's different, that maybe like takes pop songs or rock songs and stuff, and then it's for string quartet. Or I like really unusual things like that, taken from one genre and putting it into another.
Yeah.
Or like classical music that's now big band.
So basically, it's like it's rooted in classical music, but it's modernized in a way.
Yeah, and I think you need to do that now. There's very few scores. Actually, I just did a short film, and he wanted an old-sounding score, but that's quite unusual. I think most people are trying to kind of push the envelope and sound contemporary.
You kind of hear that as well, like in like modern film trailers, for example, where they have like an orchestrated version of a Beyonce song, for example.
Yeah. Yeah, I love trailers. They get like, let's get a girl singing, and we'll get her playing about grade 3 piano, and that'll start it off, and then all the wishes and the drums come in.
Just popping in there.
Yeah.
Oh, lovely. So I'm glad you were able to go a little bit more detail with orchestration. I feel like that's something that people forget when people think when you're just a composer that you do everything. It's nice to know there's a bigger field there.
Yeah.
So I thought we might now move on, I think. We'll sort of move on to the next field that we've got in, which is that you've actually gone into, you've done music for video games.
Yeah.
So I think we'll play a track from one of the video games there, if that's all right, up there. All right, so this one is for the video game Bad Day for a Balloon Ride. So would you like to sort of elaborate what the game is and how and what was the brief for you as a composer?
Okay, so this was a boy and a girl, two friends, and they're up in this air balloon. It's a kids' game, and they basically float around all these different worlds, and they've got to try and gather as many kind of jewels and different things, and have all these adventures in different worlds in this balloon.
Yeah. Okay, so it's basically just everything's through this balloon ride situation.
Yeah, so they might be in space, they might be in a cave. There was an upside down world where everything was upside down. Yeah.
Okay, so that's quite interesting. So that's a little different then, because obviously with something like a film or TV show or something like that, there's a very strict amount of time. There's all this stuff. With a video game, it's a bit more open-ended. So how do you come up with ideas for that?
Well, they ask for loops, so you have to be able to loop your music. If you're writing for TV or film, you write this way, whereas composing for games, you write this way. So you'll have a loop that's a minute long, but you never know what's going to happen in a game. So they might be floating along in a balloon and suddenly, oh, this comes in. So this later up here is going to come in because maybe it's maybe their balloon's going to get shot down or something. But then they fly out with that, so that can go away. But maybe something else is going to happen. So you write in layers to make the music move forward, and it can be more exciting or more tense. And you bring in your loops in and out that way, as opposed to film where you basically just write as it is.
Interesting. So that's the thing, is because we've got other tracks from this video game, which is it's the same thing, but it's just done, well, differently. So we'll listen to a bit of each of them.
Okay.
And then you can describe what was your idea of how to keep that but change it. So we'll move on to the next tracks.
Oh, they're in space.
So this is the space version now. So what did you do? So what do you do with that? Do you come up with them? You already come up with a motif. So then how would you adjust it for each genre? This one, the balloons in space. So how would you do that?
Space said to me, synthesizers, make it that kind of more modern synthy sound. That's the first thing that came to me.
Okay, so basically, but that one is like we're keeping the same thing, but now we'll just to attach it to a different genre.
Yeah, which is what the gamer wanted. Actually, he said, I basically want the same theme, but for a minute, and I want the children to immediately hear the theme and make it recognizable, but just put it in different settings.
Okay, so do you actually have, and this is something, a little while ago we had a little question here, I thought this would be the perfect time to come in. It's like, do you actually have like a stock of compositions ready to draw from? Or in this case, you already have a bunch of instruments at the ready for a particular, if someone says, I want a science fiction, you've already got something like a template, as it were?
No, I don't have a template. I only have that for orchestral instruments, because there's so many different synths you can use and sounds within a synth. No, I don't.
So basically, by that point, it's like you don't have already something in your back pocket. You're starting from scratch each time, almost. Yeah.
Yeah. Some people work from like a massive template and they'll put all their synths in it and things. But I think if I start a different project, I might put a template in for that project once I know what I'm using. But I like to start fresh for every project, unless it is orchestral, because those sounds are stock sounds, whereas you don't know where you're going necessarily with sound design or synths.
Okay, we'll play another track from the same game. We'll try another one. This one's a different genre, so let's have a listen. Not gonna lie, this one's quite cute.
This is them in they're going through the pirate world.
All right, there you go. So again, it's still the same riff, but you've added some things a little different to give it that piratey theme. So what did you do there?
Yeah, so pirate instrumentation to me says accordions, it's got the tambourine in there, it's kind of got a little jauntiness to it, which it didn't have before. So that's arrangement, really.
Yep.
So you can do instrumentation, and you can also do arrangement.
So in this case, it's not, so like maybe if I just arrange it slightly, do something different here, you get something.
Yeah, it's kind of got a swing to it.
Yeah, it does. It actually has a bit. Well, the other one seemed to be going fluid. This one's got a bit of a jaunt to it, like a little bit of a jig.
Yeah, the original one was in 6/8, and now this is in 2. You know.
Okay, so is that actually? Yeah, obviously at that point it's like, okay, if we're keeping the same thing but changing it, you can change in every aspect, can you?
Yeah, you could change time section. You could make it a waltz if you wanted to. If they were suddenly going through a ballroom, you can have the same theme, but you can have it in 3/4, and you can have the orchestra playing it because they're doing a lovely waltz in this world.
All right. So on that note, we'll move on to the other one because now we're going something very different here. Shall we play that one? Okay, so where are we?
We're in Jurassic World. This is the dinosaur world.
Perfect.
And then that's the theme coming in there in the horn.
Yeah, there we are. So sometimes you're keeping that riff going, but now this is a very different arrangement for that. So how did you come up with this one? So he seems almost minimalist in comparison.
Yes. So for this, I wanted the kind of stompiness, and then I wanted to use like a kind of crumb horn, not like a French horn, but a horn that you just kind of blow through, you know. And for that, it didn't really work, just kind of playing the melody out. So it's just got parts of the melody, just the outline of the melody in there. But it was really kind of the stompiness and the big brass sound in the drums, because like, ooh, they're big dinosaurs.
So it's helping, the music is helping almost give a visual as well, because the drums are like the big heavy dinosaurs walking around the world. Yeah,
and you have to watch your kids' games because you can't make it too scary either. You know, so you have to kind of keep it nice and light-hearted.
Yeah, so in other words, you can't have like the terrifying music in Jurassic Park with the, you can't have that in it. So,
yeah.
That would have been a very different game. I want to ask, got a question here. Let me just see if I can find that quickly. I have a question here from Adam. And he goes and said, how would you go about networking when it comes for games? Because he said there's so many game developers seeming to want to ship titles for sound design work, for example. So how do you network? How would you kind of network if you're working for video games as a composer or a musician?
Well, there are loads of gaming conferences and things you can go to now. EGX comes to mind, but there's loads of them down. There's loads of, what's it called when you do the 48-hour challenge, the gaming challenge?
Those gaming jams.
The game jams, yeah, that kind of thing. You can do that. There's also lots of forums online, like indie developers looking for music. Usually you have to do it for free, but you're getting titles to your name, you're getting credits to your name, because the bigger companies, they never really ask for people with no credits. You know, they're always looking for, right, we're looking for people who've done a AAA, or we're looking for people with 5 credits or 3 credits or whatever it is. So if you can get like on the indie games and get some credits, then you can then approach the bigger companies. So
basically, do start on the indie circuit, go down and
and the student circuit, because the EGX and things like that, or these game jams. I mean, a lot of them are students, and they need the credits as well. So if you, and then that's where you start. There's a branch in your tree. You've done a credit with, you know, you've done a game with these people. You don't know what they're going to go on and do. They're probably friends with some other people who do games. They might need music, and then suddenly that branch of your tree has got more branches coming off it.
Building up that tree, as we said, right
Building up the
from
tree.
the very beginning.
Yeah.
Just before we kind of move on to the next game that you did, which is very different, I want to ask, are there any games that you actually want to make music for?
I'm not a big gamer, to be honest. My sons would want me to do Planet Coaster, but they did a great job with music on there. They're absolutely obsessed with roller coasters. I just like writing music, so there's no particular... I wouldn't mind what the game would be.
Yeah.
you know, for example. And briefs are really, really interesting. I mean, the scores for games now are fantastic. So if you can get a big budget and get a really good brief in, I wouldn't mind what the game was, to be honest. I'm not very good at them, but so I'd have to get my kids to play it for me so I could hear what my music sounded like in level 18 or whatever. But
so to be a composer or something like that for something like video games, it's so for example, you're not much of a gamer, so it means that is it approached differently, for example, than if you were a gamer? Would you approach some things differently, you think?
Perhaps. You probably have a more encyclopedic knowledge of game soundtracks than what I would have. But to be fair, if you do get a brief, usually go away and do your research anyway, because they'll say, oh, we love this game, and this game. We love the music for this, this, and this. Kind of like a temp track for a film. They say, they'll give you a list of all the music that they do like and say, well, we're kind of in this genre, but we don't want music like that, but we loved it.
Yeah.
We want something kind of original in the same vein.
Okay, so basically very much like the directors would be with films. They give you, here's some tracks, run off that then basically. This time it's our video game music, which is quite nice.
Yeah.
Wonderful. We've got another video game you've done. This is very different. This is basically, it's a Las Vegas casino kind of game, one of these mobile games. So can we have a play of that one, please? All right, this is very, very different. So would you want to elaborate this time around? What is this game in particular, and how did you come up with the music for this?
Okay, so they say Las Vegas, and immediately Las Vegas, it's glitzy, it's glamorous, it's big band, you know, it's the Rat Pack, it's all that kind of stuff. So you have to make it really, really exciting. It's an energy level up here all the time.
Yeah.
You're looking at saxes, drums, trumpets, and that big jazzy sound, really.
So this is big band, this is all kind of big there. This is a bit interesting because this is more of a mobile gambling kind of game. I'm assuming then the brief there must have been, what would the brief be for this? This is not a game that would have something like a narrative. So
no, so you just get big win, bigger win, epic win, really epic win. So that was like the big win, and then the next track you play is like that is going to be the next level up. So basically you're just trying to build excitement all the time, and that you want the player to keep playing. So
it's mostly about atmosphere here and energy levels rather than just trying to say, because all the other ones we've been talking about so far, you say, oh, I want a particular meaning or a picture of visual. Poker games and casino games are not one where you want to have a whole story in.
No, you're basically just trying to create some excitement with the player. So if something happens in the game, there were sound effects I had to kind of put up, and then suddenly there's a transition, and then you go. So you might be playing that track, and then suddenly they hit something really good. There's a bit of a sting or a transition, and then they go into like the next track kind of seamlessly, and suddenly they're like, oh, I could win here, and they kind of play a bit more. So that's what you're trying to generate.
Okay, is with the music here as well, it's still that kind of idea, or it's still a loop, it just builds up from that loop?
It builds up from that loop, and you just have like stings or transitions to get you up into the next loop. And you don't know how long they're going to be playing it for. They might be stuck on this for 4 minutes, so you need to make sure that the 1 minute loop is quite interesting. And you also had to write an intro and an outro. So the intro would come in, the loop would happen, but it might stop halfway through the third time through the loop. You play the outro and then sting, and then you're into your more exciting track, your huge epic win.
Okay. All right. I think we got one more track from this, I believe, don't we? So would you want to play that one just to give a bit of difference? This is the one now. This is the more epic one now, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, it's slightly different here. So how did you make this more epic, basically?
The tempo's faster.
Yep.
And there's lots of get a cup of tea. There we go. My glamorous assistant.
Thank you.
So a faster tempo.
Yep.
The sax and trumpets are doing lots of runs, like lots of semi-quaver runs, running up and down. I've got the organ that's kind of doing glissies up and down. The bass line is a real walking bass line. So before it maybe gone dum, 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 but now it's gone dum, 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 dum. So everything's driving forward.
So it feels more like it's speed. There's a lot more to it.
Yeah.
So if you're building up on something, how would you, for example, build it up? For example, so would you add certain instrumentation to add more notes? Would you just make something faster? How would you build it, as it were?
I didn't add more instruments because kind of what I was talking about before, the sound world, it is that big band. So all the way throughout, I've used the same instruments. Sometimes you can take it up a key. You might modulate, you might go from C major up to D major, which is a bit more sparklier, a bit brighter.
Yep.
So that helps. Making it faster helps. Or before, you could keep it the same tempo instead of the instruments playing maybe quavers. They're doing semi-quavers.
So just add more, basically. It's just more.
It's just more, yeah. And you can modulate within the piece as well.
Yep.
That can get a bit tricky if you're doing loops. So you have to kind of watch where that goes, because you don't want to start in C major and then end up in E flat and then you loop and you're back in C. That could sound a bit dodgy, but
just a little bit. So yeah, so this again, like, it's a very interesting sort of thing from here, because we're now going to move on from games. Because you've done a lot with video games, but now we're going to move on to what we're calling library music, because we've got a lot of questions here about about all the compositions you've done for TV programs. But it's an actual fact. How much of the TV compositions were actually designed for the TV show, and how much of it was library?
All of it. All my credits are library.
Wow.
The budgets for TV, unless it's like TV drama on a Saturday night, they don't have the budget to hire a composer. So they use library tracks. So basically there's an editor sitting in his room and he's got a computer full of different albums of different moods, different genres. And your title is very, very important, because basically he'll be saying, okay, we've got Kim Kardashian here, and oh, look, she's just decorated a new room. She's calling this the English room. Right, I need an English sounding track, you know, pomp and circumstance perhaps, and bloom, some tracks will come up. He puts it underneath the visuals and you go, yep, that one works, I'm using that.
Wow.
And that's how it goes. But what's good about library is that same track, I got it used in Come Dine With Me, I got it used in and many other TV shows. Yeah. So you get royalties for that. So that one track can have run 10 different shows, and the Kardashians been running for quite a few years now, and I'm still getting some royalties through from that, because it goes to different countries. So they might play it in America, and then they'll go, oh, actually, we're selling that to wherever, which is really good.
Wonderful. So we're going to actually have a demonstration of some of your library work, and then we'll talk about how it's done. The first one we have up is one which is sort of like it's called Thrill the Chase, which happens to be sort of for trailers. So shall we have that played? Wow. Okay, so that one there is for that's Thrill the Chase, that's for trailer. So first of all, this is just sort of like library music as far as a trailer. So what do you do when you want to compose library music? How do you come up with like ideas or things for themes, as it were, to build up on that stock library music?
Well, you get a brief, and the brief for this was percussive. Okay. So immediately everything's going to be percussive. But what's really, really important, especially for trailer tracks, but in library tracks in general, you need edit points. So what you heard in that track, there was 2 points where it absolutely silent. Yeah. And the reason for that is when that editor's picked your track, he might not use all of your track. Okay. But most of the time he won't. He might say, oh, I like the beginning of that. So he'll use that edit point to chop it off there. And he might pull somebody else's track for the next section. You know, so actually I like the end bit, I'll use the end of Andrea's track kind of thing. So you need to have 2 edit points in your tracks, so that and if you don't have that, editors won't use your tracks.
So is it more like it's like a 3-act structure in that sense, like we have a nice bit in the beginning that they could use, something in the middle they could use, something in the end they can use,
and it builds in tension each act.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah. So coming up with sort of like so obviously, does every single one have a brief, or are there moments where you kind of feel like you could just be a bit more, I'm just going to make this for the sake of it?
Well, you can do that and then try and sell it to the library. Okay. But they're all on albums that are themed. So this theme was like percussive action music, you know. So you know that's what the album would be in the editing room. So if he was looking for just percussion, that's what he'd be going for. The next album might be, oh, these are all kooky, kind of quirky, right? If I'm looking for that, then I'm going to type it in and it's going to be on this album, and there will be like 10 tracks to 15 tracks on that album, all quirky, and then they can choose which ones they want to use.
Okay. Well, just to ask a question here, we've got, it says, one question here says, what advice would you give to the students when they're wanting to choose or compose music for like their films? In this case, you've got library music, as it were, but how would they go about, for someone who's not really much of a composer and wants to sort of find music? Any advice about trying to find the right song for their projects?
Oh, it's tricky. Well, there's lots of libraries out there that you can approach, and there's different licenses you can get for it. So you can buy music just to be used online. You can buy music for TV, just for film. You can, if you wanted a song, you know, that's a big music publishers you would go to if you wanted to get a song synced into your film, and you'd have to find out how much that would cost.
Yeah, because that's leading on to another question as well, which we can talk about, is so could you elaborate a little bit on sort of the legal factors when composing like that, for example, like licensing and things like that?
Well, that's a whole other webinar, to be honest. Yeah, it's quite complicated because you've got your royalties, PRS royalties, which are your performing royalties, and then you've got your mechanicals, which are if your music's put to film, your synchronization rights, and they're two very different things.
Yeah.
That's really where you need a publisher.
So that's where that point you have to bring someone else to bring into this situation.
Yeah, and when you write music for library, I mean, you go 50-50 with the publisher.
So in other words, it's sort of like the person making the album, basically, or the ones publishing this, and then you.
Yeah.
In terms of this, do you find this one, because obviously, is this sort of the library work, is that sort of like a way to keep yourself active while, let's say, other projects might not be coming in as often?
Yeah, it's great that way, because if you find yourself with not a lot to do, you can say, oh, I'll just pitch for this library project, which is good. And what I really liked about it, especially when I was starting out, was I learned a lot. I learned new skill sets from doing libraries, because I wasn't really into sound design and synths and all that kind of thing. And then I pitched for that Thrill of the Chase, percussive, and I thought, well, if they say no, that's fine, but at least I'll have learned how to program the drums a bit better and improve things a bit better. And most of the things got accepted, but you know, that's an added bonus. But at the end of the day, I had a track, and then I've improved myself, and that's what library music's really good for.
It's good for improving your skills, experimenting.
Yes.
That kind of thing.
Yeah.
Wonderful. So on that note, we're going to move on to another one of your tracks. We've got this one. It's just called Kooky. So I'm curious about that one. Shall we have that play? Okay, so this one's quite interesting. It's got a bit of a Tim Burton-y vibe to it.
Yes, so LHS, that Library of the Human Soul, was the library that this was written for. And it was quite a unique library because all the tracks were 1 minute. They all had to be in either G major or E minor, because the thinking behind it was, you got a title, and the title was Cookie. You had to do 3 different versions: a cinematic one, which is quite big. You had to do an ambient one, which is the one you heard. So that meant you had a live string quartet. So you could use synths and the live string quartet. And then, what was the other one called? It was just the string quartet. Can't remember. Intimate. So there was 3 different versions of the same track, but every track on the album was in the same key and could run into the next track. So if you were if you had a film that you needed music for but didn't have a lot of money, you could go to this Cookie album, this quirky album, and have all these different titles and go, right, oh, I'll use that, and I'll use that, and I'll use that. Or they might use my Cookie sound, but they might use the cinematic version. And then if for a quieter bit, they'll just use the intimate with just the strings. So it could kind of blend together in a cheaper way.
So it kind of builds that motif, it kind of builds all that together so you can have it for a full piece.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Great stuff. I just want to throw a question here because I feel like this one's actually quite a fun question, which is, are there any kind of emerging technologies that you find interesting that could change this field in the future? So are there any kind of interesting tech or any kind of interesting movements in composing that you find quite interesting that could be?
Well, just before lockdown hit, I was supposed to be scoring a VR film, which I'd never really heard of before. So,
Oh, wow.
and it hasn't come back yet. So hopefully it will, and maybe I could come back next year and tell you about it. But apparently they had to shoot the same scene in 7 different ways, and depending where the viewer looked with the VR headset on, it took them into different options, which kind of sounds a cross between games and films to me. So that was quite an interesting thing I thought was coming up.
Yeah. So for let's say something like that where it's like multiple options, how would you let's say had to try and compose that, knowing let's say you have one thing but you have 7 alternatives at the end of it, for example? How would you make sure that there's like blended in or anything like that?
Yeah, so you'd have to write 7 different tracks for that, but so they blend, you'd have to make them in the same key. You'd have to do that. You probably want the same tempo as well.
Yep.
You might not want the same instrumentation. That could be totally different. You might want the same theme, perhaps, or you maybe want a totally different theme, depending on what room you were going into.
Okay, so basically it's now, that sounds like a lot of fun it could be, because it's now just, would you feel like for that though, would you feel like you need to, for something like a VR movie, would you feel like you need to see the movie in this case? Or like have the headset on and give it a try? Or
yeah, you definitely need that, I think, to see if your music worked as well and how long they were going to be in this room. You know, so that in that way, I think it's quite like a computer game, because you don't know how long you're going to be in a level playing. Yeah. So you might not want a minute loop, you might want a 4-minute loop and different things coming into that 4-minute loop. Yeah. Or you might want your loop to stay static, or you might want it to build kind of like a trailer. You might want it in 3 acts, or you might want just a little bit of tension or whatever. So yeah, there'd be a lot of variables in there. You'd have to kind of talk your way through.
Wonderful. I can feel that that's because now VR is now becoming very big, that's a whole different level for a composer, which I feel be quite fun as well. Just to throw in there as well, are there any kind of we just did kooky, but I want to say, are there any kind of kooky or unique instruments that you either have composed with or would you love to compose with?
I love a bassoon. I don't know why. I love a bassoon. I tend to like treble or bass instruments. Bassoon's like cheeky. Yeah. And it's a bass instrument, and bless them, they only ever get the really boring parts. And I'm kind of the same with the viola and the trombone, because the viola, in fact, I did the documentary I did last week, we gave the viola a solo, and the guy didn't know what to do. He was like, I'm normally playing ostinatos like Hans Zimmer. What do I do? What do I do? And like, you see the rest of the orchestra laughing at him because he's like, I got a solo. So I like playing, I like instruments like that, bassoon, trombone, and viola that don't get used a whole lot. But, you know, they can be really useful.
Give them a little bit of love, basically.
Yeah, you got to give them a bit of love.
Wonderful. We're going to move on to the next track in the library. This one's called Sickening, so I'm intrigued by that one. Shall we play that? Feels quite interesting. It feels like you've got the string instruments there, but it feels like, is the bass a synthesized bass? Or...
Yes. So the strings are the only real instruments in that. The rest is all samples and synths. Okay, so this is a bit different, because you talk about how much you love real instruments, but when you start to play with something like synthesizers, how would you approach that? Basically, I knew I wanted it to be static, sickening it, what you call writing on a pedal. So you don't change chords or anything. You're writing all on this one level, but it's like, well, how am I going to make the tension happen? And writing all in a pedal, you do get a bit of tension there. Sickening, I kind of had it in my head. It was something like the film Seven or something, like, or Saw or something like that. You were like stuck in a room, and it was just a repetitive synth kind of thing happening.
It's got that horror vibe at the bottom because that
Yeah.
synth at the bottom, that's the horror element, and then the strings coming in to build the tension up as it goes. I can imagine just being next to a Saw torture room. But yeah, again, it's a different approach to the genre, isn't it? It's playing around with genres and jumping back and forth. So just before we move on then, with the different, are there sometimes days where you're doing from one genre and then the next day you're doing something completely different? How do you get in the mindset for that?
Sure, you can do that within a day. It depends, like if you're scoring animation,
Yeah.
you know, it jumps about all over the place. So you might have to do a pastiche of something and then you're back into just underscoring or whatever it is. So yeah, you just have to kind of jump about.
It's just be ready, just get the mindset ready. Like today is a horror day, the next day is an animation day.
Absolutely.
Next day.
But that can be quite refreshing because if you do get a bit stuck, you know, you can just jump into a different mindset and
just get yourself like energetic and getting ready for the next thing. Because I can imagine it's like how much time actually would you usually spend on a piece?
Well, it depends on your time frame you've got, but and it depends how big an ensemble you're writing for. I mean, if you're writing with synths and things like that, you can do stuff pretty quick. Or if it's like solo piano and strings, I mean, you can write. I've written like 2-minute tracks in half an hour because it's, you know, the sound, and especially if it was a stylistic, you know, kind of. So you just like, yeah, I can do that. Whereas if you're writing something full orchestra or you're writing hybrid music or a lot of sound design, that can take a lot longer. That can take a couple of days because to do a 2-minute track, because sound design, you maybe kind of know the end product you're looking for, but how do you get that sound? Whereas, you know, real instruments, you go, well, I know what the piano sounds like, I'm just going to write it. Whereas you've got to go through all these processes to get a synth sound that you want, or, you know, a drum sound or whatever that is.
To give it that little extra something different or that texture you're looking for. Yeah,
because everybody's got the same samples, right?
Yeah.
So you have to try and change it somehow.
So yeah, actually, just to elaborate on that then, basically, is in your work, do you actually purposely try to make it as different as what you've heard before? Or are there moments where you're saying, I could just kind of do this instead?
A little bit of both, probably. It depends how much time you've got, and it depends on the budget that they have and things like that. Sometimes, like a short film I did that I talked about earlier, he wanted an old sounding score.
Yes.
I mean, you're not reinventing the wheel there, so you just want it to sound as good as possible. You know, whereas you might get a kind of thriller or something and you go, oh, actually I can do something a little bit different with this, and I want to try and sound a little bit different.
Okay, wonderful. And speaking of different, we'll move on to the next one there, which is next track, which is called Snowfall. So we'll have a play on that one then. All right, so this is now Snowfall. Do you want to elaborate a little bit more on how you constructed and composed for that track?
So that was like the other track. So I had a live string quartet that I could use. That was the cinematic version, so you were only allowed real instruments in that. So there's another version that's got like kind of ambient synths in it.
Okay.
For me, for Snowfall, it's very gentle. I find it very calming watching snowfall, and it's beautiful. I don't know anybody that doesn't like watching snow. You know, it's not like watching the rain. It's like, ugh. Whereas snow, you're like, oh, it's so pretty. So I wanted something pretty. I wanted something gentle. But then it does get more complicated, the snow, as it gets heavier. You know, it kind of, all the patterns kind of do this. So I had all the different string instruments kind of polyphonic kind of writing happening in there, and they've all got their own line that kind of merges, but it all harmonically sounds nice.
It's making it feel like, even when you're building it up, it just adds an extra level of pretty almost.
Yes, yeah.
I'm not sure because it's just called a snowfall, but it does sound something like from that you can use in a movie in a winter scene. It really feels wintry.
Yeah.
Are there kind of like instruments, certain instruments that you would automatically think of for something like I need something very summery or something very wintry? Are there any particular instruments you go right into?
Ooh, that's a good. Yeah, summary. I'd say like woodwinds because outdoor. You can imagine like a flautist or whatever kind of playing that.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're looking for something a bit darker and heavy, you'd maybe go to the brass, you'd maybe go to trumpets and things like that.
Hmm.
And depending whereabouts on the instrument you play things, like I've got the strings up quite high on that
Yeah.
because it's quite bright up there. Whereas, you know, if it was maybe like hailstones, I maybe would have had them down the other end and a bit harder or whatever.
Yeah, so it's kind of like getting those. I like that actually. I like the idea that because there are instruments that always have a particular feel, don't they? And
Yeah.
so it's kind of nice to have them in your back pocket.
Yeah, and one instrument can have different feels within it. I mean, the cello is so versatile. I mean, you can have it right down there and it sounds quite angry, but up the top end of a cello is absolutely beautiful.
Yeah. Oh, wonderful. Yeah, I feel like it also adds context, isn't it? All depends on
Yeah,
context.
yeah.
Right, we'll throw sort of another one into the track, which is a very different one. Should we
Yeah.
have the last one on there, please? All right, so I would like to hear how you came up with this one. What's this one for?
This was for a kids album, and it was basically just fun, silly stuff that you could put on kids programs, kids up to teenagers, and it's basically me in the studio going wow 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 and getting my husband, who's a voiceover artist, just getting him to do the oh yeah, just silly things like that, and then the rest are samples. But by having the voice on it, it just lifts it up a little bit because, you know, it's not a sample.
Yeah,
But you could have put effects and layer effects on things on it. But
so something to think of as well is like, because obviously with all this, with most of the other ones we've done, we've looked at the real instruments other than a couple of bits here. This one's using majority samples, right? So how would you select your samples, or how would you find your samples and build up from there?
well, I knew I wanted voice on it, so that's probably what I started with. And then I was thinking, well, voice is quite organic, so I think I'm going to go with like an upright bass, because I really like a double bass, but played like in a jazz style, you know, not using the bowl, but pizzicato. So I wanted that. And then on top of that, I was just thinking, okay, I need some silly effects. So that's where the samples would come in.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah, it's nice when you could have like, there's your little library picking up, and you're already having a sort of a build from what seems to be a core. So is it more like, is it usually better for a composer to have like at least to have a single core, and then it can just experiment from there?
Yeah, and that single core can be different things. It can be an instrument, it can be a harmonic progression, it could be a melody, it could be a rhythm. But I think, yeah, you do need that something just to start you off, and then you can build up from there.
Okay, I've got a question here from Pedro, and and it's something we haven't properly talked about a little bit, but we want to build it further. Saying, how much time do musicians actually have, or given, on average, when they want to complete a soundtrack? Is it longer for something like films than it is for video games, or for doing like library or TV work, or is it all depending to deadlines?
Games, you get a longer time because it takes so much longer. I mean, you could be on a game for 2 years, kind of on and off. So games, you definitely get longer time. And because they're writing it and programming it, you can develop your music alongside it. So that's quite nice. Film and TV are insane deadlines. I mean, I know people that have had to write 40 minutes of music in a week for TV. That was All Creatures Great and Small, the last TV series, because it was being shown in Britain and shown in America, and apparently the Americans can't have the same music as the Brits because they like it elevated. So the composer had to write a British one and then an American version. So that was 40 minutes of music in a week, which is a lot.
Does that mean then, we're not asking, when does the composer come into a project? Does it come in have you worked with like directors or anything like that where it starts off very early, or does it come very much like last minute?
It can be either. I've come in like before even the script's been written. been in the like development meetings, and I've also come on board when the composer's been fired and they're like, yeah, we need it in 3 weeks' time. We fired the last one, now you do it. No pressure.
When something like that happens, when someone's been fired and you replace, how does that go? How's the relationship there?
Yeah, well, you don't ever really know who the other composer is, but yeah, usually the directors, you have to do some soul searching with them, say, well, why did you hire me now, and can you pinpoint any tracks of mine that you really liked, because that gives me a shortcut.
Good. So
and what was the music like from before, because I don't want to write and repeat what you've just been not liking.
That's absolutely fair. So how can a director in that case, let's say in that scenario, when let's say something's bad's happening or the music is kind of left last minute, how much can a director help you here to make it easier for you?
If they can try and describe what they're trying to convey on screen as much as possible, you know, they're saying, we're trying to add a bit of tension here. Usually you're fixing something that's wrong with the picture. They'll say, oh, I wanted to do this, but we ran out of budget or we ran out of time. Can you maybe write some tension music here just to elevate it that little bit? So if they can guide you just by describing what they want, because they'll know if they want tension, or they'll know if they want a release, or we just need something under it. We just need, don't care what it is, just something really subtle, but you don't really hear it, kind of thing. or like, this is the big moment, we need a huge theme to come back here, or whatever it is. You know, if they can tell you that, you know, is a lot of the job done. You just need to go and write it then.
So just provide as much information as possible without possibly stepping on your toes, because like we mentioned before, it sounds like especially if they're very musically minded, they might go and say, well, actually, I would like the trumpet there, please. It's like,
and it really kind of guides you when you're thinking, oh, I don't think that's going to work, you know. But you feel you have to keep, well, you're working for them, so you have to kind of do what they, but it would sidetrack you, you know. If you can throw a wild card in, which I've done before. I've written a track because the director said, I want piano. So I've done piano thinking, not sure. And then I've done a wild track. So, oh, I've also written this. And sometimes they'll go for the wild card because they're like, oh, I never thought of that.
Does it help then to have sort of like a plan B, like something stacked in the corner?
Yeah, it can do, especially if you're not too happy with the direction they want you to go in. You can always throw a wild card in. If it doesn't work, well, you know, you pitched your stall.
It's no loss, and you've got something in your back pocket in case for the next director who needs another wild card.
And they might get further into the film and go, actually, what you wrote right at the start, that there was a wild card, let's go with that instead, after you've done 5 versions of what they wanted.
Oh, but that's wonderful. It's kind of it's interesting how to talk about the relationship between filmmakers, video game designers, and all that with the composer and orchestrator. There's a lot more that I didn't realize there was, actually. When you first started doing this, did you ever realize it was this fiddly?
No, I was a bit ignorant going into it, and I think that was probably a good thing. But what I will say, though, is composers tend to be really friendly people. And they're very helpful. You know, if you email somebody or ask a question on Facebook, they're generally very, very good at helping you, which I don't think you get so much in other industries. I mean, you can ask something on Facebook, and, you know, I've had replies from Hans Zimmer or John Powell, like really, really big composers. Whereas if you're an actor, I don't think like Tom Cruise or John Travolta or anybody like that saying, oh, I think you should do this for this scene. You know, you don't really get that, but you do with composers. So,
I think, is it because you think that, is it perhaps they all relate? It's like, look, we get this. We've
been there.
We've been there. I know we've had to cover this for 3 weeks. Kind of thing.
Yeah, they've all been there, and somebody's usually helped them up the ladder, so they're usually willing to pay it down, kind of thing. Yeah, I've heard that said a lot. You know, people that have helped me up, and I always try and pay it back, pay it down the ladder, and that's really nice.
Yeah. Just for a couple of questions then, as we're closing into a wrap-up, I want to ask, well, we had Go Window actually said this a while ago, wrote down and said, what was your first ever job, and would you have any advice to give to someone who wants to get into it?
My first ever job was with one of your leaders, James West. I think you call him Jim, yeah. So I went to the Edinburgh Film Festival, and I got talking to a director, and he was about to do his first short film, which was Night of the Hell Hamsters. It was a horror.
Brilliant.
And I'll never forget, one of the cues, he said, oh, what would you like with this? He went, I want levitating hamster music. And I went, okay. And I went home and went, how do I write levitating hamster music? Anyway, I did, and he was very happy with it.
Yeah.
But, and James was doing the sound design on it.
Yes.
But that was just by me going to a festival, talking to people. Oh, what are you doing? Oh, you're doing your first film. Oh, well, if you need any music, here's my card. And then he got in touch with me later on. And then I went and I've done 4 shorts with that director and a feature film. So with James as well, yeah.
All through the power of networking.
All through the power of networking.
Something to add then, how important is something like building your portfolio in this case to start off with? Like, let's say you haven't made anything for feature films or anything like that just yet. How important is it to actually maybe build up like a stock portfolio or having like a social media presence to help you get recognized, things like that? Yeah,
you definitely, even if you've only got 3 tracks that you can just write at home. I mean, there's loads of students out there making films. You can get in touch with them and ask if you can do some music for them. You can also, like, if you're really confident, say, I love this TV program. I don't think they did a good job, so I've rescored it, kind of thing. You'd have to be confident in your abilities for that, but you definitely need 3 tracks that you think are really, really good, and then get them up on SoundCloud or get your own website and start looking for people who you could approach, or festivals you could go to, or conferences you can go to meet people. Because they'll say, as soon as you say, oh, I'm a composer, they'll say, okay, so what have you written? Oh, then you can pass on the details then. Whereas if they say, oh, what have you written? You go, oh, well, I've not yet, but I've got a good idea to, it's not going to fly. Yeah. But they're not that bothered if you haven't got credits. Because if you're approaching students or first-time film directors, if they like your music, they will take a chance in you, because they're learning as well. And you're learning together. There's no way your first job is going to be a TV drama series for the BBC. Your first job is going to be a short film, or it's going to be an indie game, or it's going to be, a library track or something. And it's a good job because, you have to build up to that. You have to get experience. You have to get fast at writing and know your kit inside out. So
just get to actually get a chance to just put something out there, even if it's just a couple of tracks you've made for yourself.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Then go from there. Just to throw a couple of things there while we add on to this, is like one of the things, how would you recommend, for example, maybe getting a work as something like an assistant? Would that be helpful as well?
Yes, as I think if you're young, then yes, it is. By the time I got to it, I was a bit too old to be a composer's assistant. So if you're young, then absolutely. They probably wouldn't get you jobs. There's the odd case where if they fall in, then you step up and whatever. But the composer's assistant is really learning your trade. It's learning how somebody who's really good at what they do does it, and learning the process. So that you're quick at doing that. And that's what being a composer's assistant is really useful for. Okay.
Yeah, it's always useful. It's always useful, at least for experience, to know how it's like in that job, to be the assistant of someone like a composer or an orchestrator. So let's say someone's being an assistant. By that point on, how could they, from there, maybe not get the job right away, but how could they then elevate themselves to say, no, I want to try and be now the composer or the orchestrator?
Well, they do what I've been saying, really. You go to the festivals, you go and meet people. That's how you do it, because a composer would only give you a job as an assistant composer. He can't give you a film. He can't give, because they're going to be scoring it.
Yes.
So you have to, sometime you have to sever the link and go, okay, I'm going out on my own now. But if you've got a bunch of credits that are really quite good, then you perhaps can approach the directors and producers at a higher level than what you do if you were a composer starting from the ground up and not assisted.
So that's just more help to get the credits underneath your belt before you can go do that. Obviously, you still do all the stuff on the side and everything else, and then boom.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Sort of to kind of maybe semi-wrap up from here, what I ask is, Callum's actually said, which project did you find the most fun to work on so far, and why?
Oh, that's a hard question to end on. I love Stardog and Turbo Cat only because the music was such fun, because animation is just great fun. So I really enjoyed that. I love doing the Devil's Rock with James, and somebody said they'd seen Paul Campion. I enjoyed the Devil's Rock because there was an 11-minute queue and I had to write 11 minutes of music and I had to keep the tension going for a whole 11 minutes. And I remember coming in at night going, oh, wait a minute, my shoulders are way up here. I need to relax. So yeah, that was really good fun. Yeah, I'd say those two. They're really opposite, aren't they? They're like horror and then like really fun animation. So.
But obviously you enjoy them for very different reasons then, obviously.
Yeah. And it does keep you fresh with your music as well.
Yeah, indeed.
Because sometimes you can get pigeonholed and you're always writing the same
thing, which leads to what a sort of a question here is, last sort of question is, what can someone do to stand out? Is it basically not pigeonholing yourself?
I'd say there's two answers to that. There's one where you find your own voice and you're so unique that people know you for that, like Thomas Newman. He's got a very unique sound. Danny Elfman's got a very unique sound. Yeah. You could be like that. Or you can be like the majority of composers, I'd say, who are chameleons and they can turn their hands to many, many different styles and many different jobs.
So in other words, try and be as unique as possible, or to expand, to be able to put your finger in all the pies, basically. Yeah.
I mean, if you've got your own voice, that's great. But you know, to be heard amongst, there's so many composers out there. I mean, you really have to be very, very good and very, very unique, which is very difficult to do. You know, but there's ways of making a living out there just by being a chameleon and having that variety.
Wonderful. And you know what? I think that is by far the perfect way to sort of end our wonderful interview. Thank you so very much for joining us today. It's been a lot of fun, very insightful, and I'm so glad to have you on. It's been a pleasure. So just for now, we just want to say thank you for sharing your insights. If you'd like to sort of stay behind so we can have a little bit of a catch-ups. But with that, thank you guys so very much for joining us today, and hope you enjoy the rest of Industry Week. Thank you very much.